Good morning, everyone. My name is Hanna Liubakova. I'm a journalist from Belarus and a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. It's a pleasure to welcome you today to this event, Journalism at a Time of Crisis. It's the event organized by the European Endowment of Democracy, and it's part of World Press Freedom Day that we've been celebrating or focusing on or paying attention to, because it's really hard to celebrate, I think, in such country as Belarus, or particularly in Ukraine, where there is an assault on journalism at the moment. I'm joined today by a great panel of speakers. On my right side is Nataliya Gumenyuk. She's a Ukrainian journalist specializing in foreign affairs and conflict reporting. Until 2020, she headed the independent Ukrainian broadcaster Hromadske TV. On my left side, is it left? Yeah. Pavol DEmes is an expert on foreign policy and civil society based in Bratislava. He's vice chair of EED Executive Committee. After the democratic changes in 1989, he was Minister of International Relations and Foreign Policy Advisor to the President of the Slovak Republic. We have Jakub Parusinski. Jakub is a co-founder and editor at The Fix, a media industry publication and research center covering the European media sector. He is also a managing partner at Genomics Media Consultancy. He has managed the Kiev Post as CEO and is currently the CFO of Kiev Independent. And Barys Haretski, deputy chairman of the Belarusian Association of Journalists, BAG, B-A-G, is the main independent organization of journalists, which has been protecting the rights and freedoms of the media since Lukashenko came to power, winning hundreds of lawsuits, thousands of cases of assistance and protection of colleagues. And just last week, BAG was awarded the UNESCO prize. I'm sure Barys will talk about that. And Hanna Liubakova is an interpreter. She will be helping translate Barys into English. So I think the timing of today's panel cannot be more crucial. In Ukraine, journalists are not only providing life-saving information to their people, to their communities in the whole country, but also tell the story to the world. In Belarus, dictator Alexander Lukashenko has never particularly liked independent press, but I think since 2020, he's been trying to eliminate our journalism as profession, and we will focus on both countries today. We will speak about challenges that journalists are facing in both Ukraine and Belarus. We will also discuss how to help. And I'll start with Nataliya, because Nataliya needs to leave at around 11. So we will speak, Nataliya will give her, remarks in the beginning, and then I would like to ask you, the public, to prepare your questions so that we can ask Nataliya, and then we will also proceed with the panel. Nataliya, you wrote for The Guardian in your column, after the Bucha massacre, it feels like we have to change the way we treat this war. Before, we tried to figure out Russia's military strategy, to be better prepared. But the case of rape in a village near Kharkiv, the mines in a botanic garden in Trestenets, and shooting men with tied hands in peaceful suburbs of Kiev, these actions do not make any sense, aside from a desire to punish Ukrainians. You have reported about Crimea and Donbass in the past years, but you also have acknowledged that what you've seen in Irpin, what you've seen in other places in Ukraine, cannot be compared to anything you've seen before. Tell us about what you are seeing in Ukraine. Tell us about the challenges you and your colleagues are facing at the moment.
So, hi, good to be here. I came from Kiev, and I try in this brief introduction to to convey. Just giving you example, yeah, I'm quite experienced war reporter in Ukraine. And apart from everything we need to do, bringing the bulletproof, in addition to bringing the bulletproof vest, my helmet, and everything, every time I get out from home, every day for the last 2.5 months, I would keep with me, with my laptop, with all the things I need just to be charged, because what if there won't be electricity elsewhere? I would carry all my documents, all my money, everything I possess, like a ration of the food and maybe something, because I never know. What if my apartment would be bombed and I don't want to leave it there? What if the car I leave for a second would be under the attack? What if I cross to the part of the town and would be cut off from the part I stayed earlier? And basically it's quite a thing. And while being on the constant deadlines, in addition to what a lot of journalists experience, I would probably as well would understand that if you have this brief moment to sleep, there would be air sirens, and exactly unfortunate moment you manage to fall asleep, and then you wake up and you go either to the basement or the safe part of your house. And that would be the best reality for many journalists working in Ukraine, because there are those who worked in Mariupol, in Kharkiv, whose flats had been destroyed, either who need to fled or take care about families, kids, and be probably less prepared than me. We speak about the World Press Freedom Day, something what I want to address while talking and giving the interview as a Ukrainian reporter. A lot of people ask about like propaganda, censorship, the danger of the journalist. What is unique about the Ukrainian war, unfortunately, or fortunately for us, it's a war against democracy. I think we used to think in the cliche, in a way that there is an authoritarian leader, so the government usually try to pressure the journalist. And so in this regards, fortunately, Ukrainian journalists are indeed in the different situation than Russians and Belarusians. We actually had never have our government been so open and transparent. The ugliest politicians have given more access to us than usually before, because finally they also understand this is an existential threat for them, and they do understand that the government understand that they need foreign reporters to tell the story, as I said, but as well, they need to pass the message, because journalism is a service. It's just us being on the spot, are able to tell whether the bridge is bombed, is it safe to go there, what help is needed, what is needed to the people to bring this help. So in a way, we're working in a free, democratic, pluralistic environment, despite of everything, which is pretty unique. So the challenges are basically physical, and they're coming from a different state. They are, of course, about the bombs. The most unfortunate things, of course, there are huge parts of the country which we do not have access, and that is the occupied territories. And the journalists who've been killed, some of them, they were also killed because they were trying to get to the occupied territories in Irpin, in Bucha, or elsewhere. So there are two major obstacles for us. But what I want to say about the challenges, having kind of this brief introduction, that all of a sudden we should understand that imagine your towns, imagine any peaceful country, as most of the part of Ukraine was. There were war and the occupation in the 7% of the country. All the rest was like everywhere in Brussels, in Erin town. So the provincial TV stations, journalists, were covering their local news, the potholes in the roads, other things. And all of a sudden, they have to become the war reporters and correspondents. And this is incredible demand for the resources. They were never trained, they were never meant to be trained like that. And so the biggest struggle is exactly for those resources, because now you really need to have a car and a fuel, you need to be on the spot. Unfortunately, actually the biggest problem for the Ukrainians now, we lack journalists, because a lot of people were relocated. A lot of newsrooms weren't really able to survive, especially in the small towns, or weren't really capable to, to move to this mode. And we do understand that, the provincial TV station in Bucha, a suburb where 30,000 people were living in Kiev, wasn't really meant to cover what they are covering now, the war crimes. And not all the some of this journalism are the victims, some they remained, but their mode should be changed, everything. So to finalize, my call and everything for Ukrainian reporters is actually providing the physical infrastructure to make them to do their job. Shortly mentioned, for the last years, I think we were a bit wishful thinking that it's just a normal situation. We, develop our marketing departments, lifestyle, all these kind of things. They turn to be all irrelevant, and it's just not a business, neither in Belarus nor in Russia. And I do think that the international support should be resought very, absolutely. And it's not a matter because, I probably should be in this position of somebody coming from the front line and telling the uncomfortable things. But I do think we kind of got it a bit wrong. We underestimated we actually marginalized the topics of the human rights and conflict because we thought like we can pretend it's not happening, but it was boiling. So now there is something to really rethink. And I'm speaking not because I want this, but it's a matter of security, but it's also a matter of saving lives. Because the local journalists, there are 500,000 people who lived in Mariupol before. Even like the best international publication, they would do 2 stories of Mariupol, but they wouldn't tell those stories. They wouldn't report on what's happening in Bucha now. And there would be just local reporters who need to provide a very basic information which possibly would save lives of the people. Therefore, that would be the mode we would live for the next years, and that's really something to, to discuss and to deal with.
Thank you, Natalia. So before the audience has a chance to ask a question, I have the right first. So we briefly talked today about, earlier today, about whether the West gets it right about Ukraine. And if you could also mention this in what should perhaps change in how the West covers Ukraine and what would your recommendations be. But if you could also mention concrete, priorities. You talked a little bit about that, but recommendations, specific recommendations. What type of help, assistance is needed at the moment?
So luckily, because of what the Western intelligence was telling for quite a few months, a lot of very good Western reporters came to Ukraine prior to the war, which is quite unusual, because usually you come to the place and this war-torn territory kind of looks exotic like any other wars. So they spent quite a lot of times in nice cafes, traveled around very beautiful country, in Mariupol as well, and had their time for home task to understand the history and everything. So when the bombs fallen on Kiev, I think a lot understand what actually was attacked and how much, they understood what is lost. So I do think that it's helped Ukraine not to be just like another war-torn territory. But at the same time, I do think a lot is discussed about this geopolitical fight between the US and Russia. It is there, but of course it's a war against the Ukrainian population, and by this I mean not the ethnic Ukrainian population, but civic identity of Ukrainians, which represent the thrive for the democracy, thrive for the rule of law, and which Russia tries to destroy. But I do think it's not. What is interesting that Ukraine is not just a victim. It obviously is, but actually Ukrainians are fighting this war, and it's not this claim for empathy to the victim. It's something which Ukrainians try to say the solidarity we are fighting for, and explaining this actually the values Ukrainians are fighting for, and these are not the loud words. Not supporting and not kind of portraying Ukraine from this side would be quite a bit of hypocrisy, what I say. It's up to everybody to decide what help should be provided. But I do think that it's also very important not that just to have this a mode where you explain another war crime after another war crime when there would be the fatigue of that. But also, Ukraine is a place which inspires. So while me traveling on the from village to village, from the region to region, what gives me the, you know, the strengths, I've seen quite a lot of bad stuff, to be honest, within the last months. But going anywhere, I'm actually absolutely astonished and inspired by talking to the, you know, a 24-year volunteer in Sumy who, you know, is baking the bread, about a local mayor who does everything possible the water works, to the guy who repaired the internet connection in Bucha under the shelling. And I do think these are the stories which shows like incredible resilience and something unusual and something different what actually you usually used to hear. And I don't want to undermine any other conflict, any other people. I think everybody deserves solidarity, but I do think that's something to be meant, because negative emotions, they bring fatigue. The inspiration, there couldn't be fatigue for inspiration, and there's plenty of it.
Thank you. Now it's time for questions before we proceed with the panel. Are there any questions? I don't know what's the procedure. So there are mics.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Natalia. Alistair from the European Endowment for Democracy. I have two questions. The first one is, you say there's a lack of journalists. Do you see people wanting to join the newspapers and the media outlets? You know, is there a place to support more interns? So how can we get more people involved? And the second question is about the, you know, we exist in, it's military law in Ukraine right now, and as a result, there is a certain, you know, commitment not to reveal the locations of Ukrainian military, for example, from what I understand. You know, is there self-censorship? Is there some kind of censorship? How does this really affect the media today? And how is the independent media versus the, you know, the 24-hour Ukraine channel going on? How do you find your place in all of this?
So responding on the second, I should say, yeah, there could be some military restriction, I would rather say. You know, they can't censor. If I know, I can publish. They wouldn't. I think but there is some self-regulation in the community to understand what is dangerous, what is not. I've been personally shown many cases when there was a person given an interview from the territorial defense in front of the house, and the house would be demolished the next way and the person would die because there would be the visual of the same place. So when I know there is a location and I see the tag of the street, I would really be concerned, and I find myself irresponsible. I would say that I would endanger their life, because military are also humans. You know, it's not to me to protect with the guns, but not to do something because knowing, or for instance, we know that the hospital are targeted. We know they are deliberately targeted. Starlink facilities are targeted. So you basically should really be very careful. So there is a balance between the military censorship and the responsibility. Yes, there is a call not to report the casualties among the military. They don't give us this number. If I go to the village and would see 8 graves with the military soldiers, I can report on that. It's okay for me. It's okay to tell their stories. So it's not really it doesn't really have the large impact to be. If you really think overall, it's still way from perfect, to be honest, but I really see incredible transparency, which I think sometimes is a bit even, you know, I won't say too much. I'm at the side when there is no too much of freedom. So this would be the one thing. On the lack of the journalists, it's not really about the interns. I think that there would be the big reshuffle this summer in particular, when people would get out of the shock on how the Ukrainian newsrooms would be rebuilt. Many just couldn't survive because they were used to do lifestyle. They won't do the lifestyle in Kharkiv now, just won't. So there are good journalists, they need to find the space. I mean, I had numbers of the reporters who went to film culture, clips, visuals, all the other things, and now they think like they find themselves irrelevant. So the idea is how you really find the ways where responsible and credible journalists who has lost their job find their place, maybe in a different newsroom, maybe in a new newsroom, but with some foreseen future, not like a temporary scholarship for a month, but like a salary for half a year, so a person would know he or she would relocate. They don't want to relocate to the Western Ukraine, for instance, from Kharkiv, but they want to relocate to Kiev where things are happening, but they are unable to work, for instance, in Kherson or in Mariupol. So it's really about the reshuffle and to really understand who would be capable to work in the current mode, because many newsrooms just won't exist the way they did. Many good newsrooms lost their people because some went to the front line to fight, especially males, not just them. Some went to the, like maybe moved abroad. Some are not capable to work because they have kids, or some even mental incapability to work. So reorganizing, that would be the way. But I claim for the long-term support. People are now doing a lot of producers' job for international media, but their world is broken. So even emotionally, psychologically, but in a long run, people need to have kind of a long-term perspective in newsroom as well, that if I hire somebody, I suggest something, so a person would consider whether a person need to have a flat, whether the person have to have move the family, because stability is probably the most important thing. Some even like half a year planning ahead is probably the only thing which would bring people back into the normality mentally, but also would be the most helpful thing for them as well.
Thank you. I think we have time for one question, and then we will. What? Don't see.
Thank you, and thank you for coming to Brussels. My name is Lisa. I'm working for European Endowment for Democracy, and my question is, as far as I remember, one journalist of Haretski was captured by the Russians. My question is, how do you, if you prepare the journalists for such situations, and how? And my second question is, if you can tell, I don't know if it's can be a public information, how journalists cooperate with the Ukrainian army. Thank you.
First, I think that there is enormous responsibility of the editors not to send their journalists to where the dangerous thing is. We need to stop a lot of journalists. With a particular case, I should say, unfortunately, that particular journalist traveled without the permission and against the will of the editor, and all the time went somewhere against the will of the editor. So it's quite a headache for editors as well to really deal with that as well, and know there would be always these journalists, how you really work with them in a way to stop sometimes, but it's still your responsibility to free those people, like to do anything possible, doesn't matter what's happening, to free them, because they still are professional reporters, and it would always happen in the war. And with the army, I think up to 6,000 reporters, global and international, because that's I know from the numbers, has received the credential from the Ukrainian army to work with, 6,000 at least. The good one, the one who really working, and depending on the publication, the more important your publication is, the better access you have. But to be honest, the further you go, which is a bit confronting, contrary to what I just talked about, the reporter who risks, the further you go to the front line, the easier it is to find and embed with the military. You know the limits, but I think still there is a way to work. I'm really sorry for overtaking the time of my brilliant colleagues who are from Belarus and from Ukraine and from other regions to not to speak. So really, I really want to pass the floor already.
Sure. Thank you, Nataliya. So, Barys, coming to Belarus right now. Last week, Bash was awarded the UNESCO World Press Freedom Prize 2022, and yesterday I know that Bash was also awarded another prize, another recognition. What does it mean for Belarusian journalists? And could you also briefly tell us about the situation with media in Belarus, especially in the past 2 years, so that we have an insight from you?
Thank you. My English is not very good, so I will in Russian. Ну, на самом деле я хочу начать с того, что мы тут сидим на сцене не какие-то супермены, а мы такие же, как и вы, обычные люди.
I would like to start with explaining that we are not supermen here on the stage. We are just usual people.
Просто Бог, Господь поставил нас в те места, в то время, когда нам пришлось много что-то делать, помогать коллегам и продвигать необходимые вещи в своих окружениях, в своих местах.
Just God put us on the place and time when we have to promote some things and help to our colleagues on this place.
Если о ситуации в Беларуси, вы знаете, что в 2020 году у нас Лукашенко проиграл президентские выборы.
You know about the situation in Belarus that in 2020 year Lukashenko lost his president elections.
Но он не согласился уйти и начал применять очень жесткие репрессии в отношении своих граждан.
But he wasn't agreed to leave and started to repress his citizens very hardly.
Огромное количество людей побывали в тюрьмах, были искалечены, были убиты на минских улицах.
A lot of people was get in prison or became handicaps or were beaten on the Minsk streets.
Очевидно, что диктаторы ненавидят прессу, потому что пресса освещает, то есть она приносит свет в какие-то темные ситуации, которые диктаторы любят спрятать.
Obviously, dictators hate press because press bring some light on the places which dictators would prefer to hide.
И наши коллеги, и мы сами попали тоже под давление. За 2020 год у нас было около 500 случаев задержаний только журналистов. И это в основном даже начиная с августа до конца года.
We, with our colleagues, were also repressed, and we had near 500 cases of detention of journalists since August 2020.
66 коллег получили ранения или были избиты силовиками.
66 of our colleagues was blessed or beaten by police forces.
Тогда у нас была большая надежда на перемены, и мы работали днями и ночами так, как сейчас работают наши прекрасные украинские коллеги.
In that times we had a big hope to have changes, and we were working days and nights by the same way as Ukrainian colleagues works now.
В 2021 году власть белорусский диктатор Лукашенко решил уничтожить окончательно независимую прессу в Беларуси.
In 2021, Belarus dictator and authorities have decided to destroy Belarus media sector.
Диктаторы считают так, что если народ вышел на улицы, значит их туда вывела пресса.
Dictators are sure that if people came to the streets, so it means press bring them there.
Поэтому в 2021 году большинство независимых медиа было в прямом смысле разгромлено в Беларуси.
So in 2029, the biggest part of independent media in Belarus was in the full meaning destroyed in Belarus.
Силовики врывались в квартиры, выбивали двери, даже применяли специальные взрывающие средства, чтобы открыть, например, дверь в офис. И так было не только у меня в квартире, когда ко мне пришли, но и, наверное, у нескольких сотен моих коллег и в редакциях.
Police forces
специальные средства, чтобы вскрыть двери.
Police forces came to my colleagues and me too on apartments at home with using or exploding destroying offices' doors, with using special instrument. Короче, предложение.
Special tools to break into the apartment, right?
Thank you.
Yeah. Поэтому для нас очень важно было сохранить независимый медиасектор.
So it was very important for us to keep our media independent sector survive.
Если бы мы не сохранили независимые медиа, белорусское общество вынуждено было бы потреблять пропаганду белорусскую и российскую.
If we don't preserve independent media sector in Belarus, so society should just consume Belarus and Russian propaganda.
Большинство редакций независимых медиа сумели найти в себе силы выехать за рубеж и перезапустить свои издания.
The biggest part of newsroom succeed to leave the country and relaunch their media abroad.
Примерно в этой ситуации сейчас находятся многие российские свободные медиа, которые обратились сейчас к нам за помощью.
The situation is quite similar for a lot of Russian media who ask us for help now.
И у наших коллег это получилось. Несмотря на то, что вот сейчас 5 главных редакторов наших изданий находятся за решеткой, прямо вот сейчас находятся.
And our colleagues have done that successfully, even if 5 or editors in chief from Belarus media are just now behind the bars.
Всего 24 коллеги за решеткой сейчас.
We have 24 our colleagues behind the bar just now.
Наши редакции смогли выехать и достичь, выйти на аудиторные показатели, на показатели аудитории до вот этого вот разгромного периода.
Our newsrooms succeed to leave country and get back their audience working abroad in the same amount as they had before this destroying by Belarus authorities.
При этом надо понимать, что абсолютно все независимые сайты в Беларуси заблокированы, и ты не можешь напрямую через браузер зайти на сайт.
In this time, it's very important to understand that almost every independent media in Belarus are just blocked, and you, as a consumer, you cannot just go to website through your browser.
Не только белорусские независимые медиа, но и европейские, например, как Deutsche Welle.
Not only Belarus independent media, but as well European independent media, for example, as Deutsche Welle.
Мало того, власть признала все наши медиа экстремистскими материалами.
And plus, authorities considered all our independent media as extremist materials.
Это значит, что любой, кто сохраняет у себя какие-то материалы или делится с кем-то, он сразу может попасть в тюрьму, если кто-то, если власти то об этом узнают.
It means that every person who preserve such materials on his computer or share that with somebody can be just get on the prison just because of that materials.
Несмотря на это, люди продолжают читать независимую прессу.
But in this time, people keep reading independent media.
Редакции создают условия для того, чтобы аудитория могла заходить на сайты, в телеграммы, социальные сетки.
Newsroom are creating the conditions when audience can go to the website or social medias.
И не только читать, но и очень важно сейчас для белорусских медиа, которые находятся за рубежом, чтобы люди делились информацией, фотографиями, видео, и мы создаем такие возможности, чтобы люди это могли делать.
But came to read, not only to read this media, but also share that. It's very important for newsroom, and we and those newsroom are trying to create the condition where it's possible for readers to share that.
Это очень небезопасно для людей, потому что сейчас в тюрьмах в Беларуси сидят люди, которые присылали в независимые медиа фотографии.
This is very insecure for people, dangerous because just now in Belarus, as the president, there is a lot of people who are actually there because of they was sending pictures and informations to the media.
Несмотря на вот этот весь ужас, наш медиасектор, он работает, и аудитория, как это ни странно, растет в редакциях.
But even with all that horror, Belarus media keep working and their audience is growing.
Ну, а наша задача нашей организации сделать все возможное, чтобы коллеги, журналисты, редакции могли продолжать свою работу.
But the goal of our organization is to do everything possible for our colleagues and newsroom to make them keep working.
Как мы рассматриваем вот эти награды, которые мы получили за последние дни, как ну, оценку нашей работы и шанс.
We are considering all this award what we had during the last 3 days as a high estimation of our works and a chance.
Шанс на то, чтобы шанс на перемены. Шанс на перемены.
And a chance for changes.
У журналистов нету пистолетов, там каких-то патронов, электрошокеров, резиновых дубинок.
Journalists don't have a bullets or arm or electroshockers or dubinki.
Buttons, like police buttons, whatever.
That one thing.
Единственное, чем мы можем себя защищать, это слово.
And only one thing what we can be protected by, this is the word.
Ну и поэтому для нас очень важно, чтобы ситуация с коллегами за решеткой, она звучала, и чтобы был шанс на их освобождение.
For us, it's very important to make this situation with our colleagues be more loud and to give for them a chance to get free.
Я думаю, что если, условно говоря, если наши друзья и коллеги украинцы, которым мы тоже стараемся помогать всеми силами, победят в этой войне,
we have hope that in general, if Ukrainian people and Ukrainian colleagues will gain this war, so
тогда у нас появится шанс и нам вернуться домой в Беларусь.
Then we will have a chance also to came back home in Belarus.
Ну, победа в войне в Украине может принести перемены и в наш весь регион.
The victory on the war in Ukraine can bring also the changes in the whole region.
Ну и последнее, что я хочу сказать. Я горд за наш медиасектор.
And the last what I want to say, I'm very proud for our media sector.
Потому что в условиях ужасной, просто страшнейшей пропаганды российской и белорусской,
because on the conditions of really horrible Russian and Belarus propaganda,
большинство белорусов не верят Путину и Лукашенко.
Most of Belarus don't trust Putin and Lukashenko.
Мне кажется, это важно, что белорусское общество знает правду.
I consider that as important that Belarus society know truth.
Ну, мы надеемся, что нас удастся продолжать нашу работу, скажем так.
Well, we hope that we will be able to keep our work.
Well, thank you, Barys. I think we will speak about trust and why Belarusians still continue trusting independent media, despite they actually left to Poland, to Lithuania, and some other countries. But now I would like to ask Jakub. I remember 2020 when I left Belarus, when I had to flee the country. We were sitting somewhere in Kiev and discussing the amazing, booming media industry in Ukraine. Jakub also shared insights into how he helps his organization, The Fix, helps Belarusian media. And I just checked the latest publication of Jakub from February 14th on the website of The Fix. Should publishers be worried about pandemic fatigue and peak content demand? And this is just the 10 days after that. I think, Jakub, your life has really changed, and now these topics seem to be many years ago, right? It feels that way. Jakub, so tell us how the fix helps media industry in both Ukraine, in Belarus. What challenges are you facing at the moment? What has changed in the past 2 months?
Sure. Thank you, Hanna. So a couple of words, maybe just to give you an idea, because first of all, I would like to really highlight and thank Nataliya, Barys, because I think if anything, the last couple of years in Eastern Europe show how important free press is, and I would say a fighting press is. And by the way, congratulations, because I think to ask maybe a slightly provocative question for later. There is state propaganda in Belarus and in Russia, but the opinions of the people in Belarus and in Russia are very different. So congratulations to the Belarusian media sector on being able to, even in conditions of extreme propaganda, to counter the state narratives. I think that's something that is important to consider. Anyways, so look, media are important. What is it that the fix does, and as well as Genomics and these various other organizations? So we focus more on the how. We've accepted that it is important to help. The question is, how do you do that? Before the war, the fix was focused on research, on advisory work, trying to understand how media should organize and do business. Genomics was more of an implementation arm. And then the 24th of February happened and everything changed. And all of a sudden we were faced with a very, it's a very tricky situation when you need to react fast. And I would say that it's one that the media sector is not quite used to. By the way, a lot of the challenges that Nataliya, thank you for raising them, about journalists, about preparing newsrooms and things like that. It's great to think about them now, but the way to solve them is to travel back in time, 6 months or maybe 5 years, and actually start working on them to solve them. Right now, it's we can sometimes at best do stopgap measures. But anyways, on the 24th, we were kind of faced with the challenge together, myself, my colleagues from partner organizations as well. What do we do? And you're working in conditions of extreme uncertainty, right? Because you don't know. All the political and intelligence analysis say Ukraine will be taken in, 72 hours, yeah? That was the first estimate. Later that changed many times. So how do you prepare for that? So the question is that you need to make quick decisions, take risks, sometimes, balance and try to solve things before they appear, before you even know, because the golden rule of sort of crisis response is by the time you know exactly what you need, it's already too late. Usually one of the first things that you need is resources. It's money, right? So together with our partners in the Kyiv Independent, the Fix, Are We Europe, Media Development Foundation, Genomics, we launched fundraisers, various efforts. To date, I think the collective sum of all of those fundraisers is about 5.5–6 million euros, which has been very helpful. But money is great, but you can wrap yourself in a lot of dollar bills, and it does not stop bullets. So you also need equipment. And yes, everybody pays attention to bulletproof vests, but actually there's a lot more that goes into it. It's about helmets, about emergency bandages, about tourniquets, about first aid kits. And so actually most of our efforts, very quickly after launching the fundraising, everyone pays attention to the money figures because they're easy to remember. The real disaster, I would say, is when you put media people in charge of logistics. Now, I don't know if any of you, most of you, I imagine, are somehow involved in the media sector. You probably have not had much to do with logistics. Believe me, I did not as well before the 24th. Oh my God, it's complicated. You need a person on the ground in every single location. You need to understand what is the exact paperwork that you're going to need for this government post and for that government post, which letter you need to go. And by the way, it doesn't matter how many letters you have, because once you get to the border, the world is far away. Because when somebody is on the border with a truck with 1.2 tons of bulletproof vests and helmets, which was our situation a couple of weeks ago, in the border near the one going to Lviv, and the customs officer says that you need some document that was never stated in any kind of list of documents that say, look, you need this. That person is God, right? You're not, you can do whatever you want. You will not convince them unless you can do one of two things. Produce the document he wants. It's always a he, by the way. Or escalate and find a way to pressure his boss. Now, we got a bit lucky in that case and managed to get some support from on high, and that is something that journalists can do that is not always easy for other people. But yeah, spent a lot of time on logistics, figuring out how much weight you can transport, how much volume, that kind of stuff, as well as sending money to various media. I mean, just to give you a bit of a sense, I think we've sent 500,000 directly to media, 60,000 in the first, I think, 24 hours to about, I don't want to make up numbers, but it was 30 or 40 media organizations that needed fuel or to buy some equipment or whatever it was. It was just, try to help them as fast as possible. But now the situation is changing because the immediate phase of the war, that's over, right? And now we're looking at a more complicated situation because we're looking at what is happening in the next 3 months, the next 6 months, the next 3 years. This is where you need to change the game a bit. Yes, it's important to continue, the support is coming for Ukraine and for Ukrainian media right now. Will people care in 6 months' time as much? I don't know. After Maidan, after the revolution, the temperature dropped, after 12 to 18 months. I think maybe there will be the same thing again. So right now we're spending most of our time thinking about, well, how do you actually make sure that media can survive not just the current crisis, but all the challenges that come after that? On that note, I have a small announcement. It's a pre-announcement or whatever. Actually, together with our colleagues from Belarus, we have launched a joint sales house. Right now, it's representing about 15. 15. Sorry, I'm looking for the for confirmation. About 15 Belarusian and Ukrainian media, because yes, the war reporting is important, but we also need to make sure that they can sustain that war reporting, right? We need to be able to make sure that they get money, and as big as the donor community is, it will not cover all the needs forever. So the goal of the sales house is to have a single point of contact that can reach out to global tech companies, global brands, and soon it will be online and we can share all of the information, but already we're signing the first contracts, and this is also a way to sort of sustain, to bring funds to support both the Belarusian media sector in exile as well as the Ukrainian media sector that is currently fighting the war. So yeah, looking forward to continuing on that initiative.
Thank you. Thank you, Jakub. So we discussed the lack of resources, we discussed the journalists fleeing the country, we discussed many challenges that both Nataliya, Jakub, and Barys mentioned, how to deliver the support on the ground, and also how to help media in Belarus and Ukraine to remain or become sustainable, which is, I think, more the case. Long-term solutions would be the case for Belarus, right? Because, well, before the war, at least in Ukraine, I think that there was a really good, amazing media sector in Ukraine. We also discussed propaganda. So, Pavol, you have a huge understanding of the situation in both countries. Could you share your perspective, or rather EU perspective, on that situation and how EED is helping?
Thanks very much, Hanna. It's really an honor to be at this cultural center of Brussels on a very special day when people around the world are thinking about profession of journalism. And today, actually we started yesterday with big gala dinner where both Barys and Jakub were on stage awarded, and we were sitting with Nataliya together and talking about what it takes to be journalist today and why journalism matters today. Because throughout the years we always said that journalism is part of democratic fabric of societies around the whole world. Some journalists operate in more oppressive, some in less repressive, but journalism is inevitable component of any society. And since we are zooming today on two countries, Ukraine and Belarus, it is not by coincidence, because I think the destiny of international order will depend on what will happen in Ukraine and in post-Soviet space. We see many of you in the room, young people who will be, probably some of you journalists, but whether you will be in government or business or any community, what is going on in Ukraine nowadays, it's complete game changer, and it's testing post-Second World War international order, and we are still in inflammatory phase. This is not that we are thinking about what next. All European Union, and I will mention in a while EED, how it fits into overall assistance architecture of European Union, but we thought that we are escaping from COVID pandemic and we are going to recover, that we will be focusing on fixing our societies, we will be helping others to get over of these enormous health crises, that we could focus on environmental issues and all other issues. And suddenly, Vladimir Putin decided to do something which we did not believe can happen, that Europe, where two world wars started, it's at the brink of another very big conflict, which today we do not know how it will end up, because people like Vladimir Putin, who is in power for 20 years, Alexander Lukashenko, who is in power for about 27 years, 28, these people think that they are like gods, that they are deciding about destiny not only of their homeland, but in case of Vladimir Putin, who is encouraged by Patriarch Kirill, they think that they have started something like holy war, where they are going to reshape not only immediate neighborhood, because Vladimir Putin wrote a thesis that Ukrainians are not an independent nation, thus they don't deserve statehood. Vladimir Putin decided that Belarus is actually, these are white Russians, and Ukrainians are little Russians, and he wants to embrace them and create Russian world within which modus operandi, according to his logic and philosophy, will prevail. So I think that we cannot escape of this very dangerous trend, which is undermining UN Charter, which is undermining OSCE system, all post-Second World War multilateralism, which was trying to make Europe war-free zone, but suddenly war is there. We have refugees coming, and over 4 million of them from Ukraine, which are scattered in all our countries. I'm from Slovakia. We have about 60,000, mostly women with children, because men have to fight back home. So I think that we need to understand that assisting Ukraine and trying to block Vladimir Putin and all his machinery is not only case for Ukraine. I think that more and more we understand that all international order and well-being of EU is at stake. And I think that European Endowment for Democracy, which started 9 years ago as a funding instrument, which gets money from EU institutions, EU taxpayers' money, individual member states, 27. Britain, even after Brexit, is still with us and supporting this, that we were supposed to help countries to fix their democracies, allow those who want to become members of European Union to join, to fulfill conditions and so on. But we were totally unprepared that we will be dealing with authoritarianism of that magnitude. It was described by our Belarusian friends, and both Hanna and Barys can't live back home. They have to live in exile. There are hundreds of thousands of Belarusians who had to flee after 2 years ago, all these massive things. Ukrainians, as Nataliya was mentioning, are dealing with elementary safety and are dealing with cruelty, which we never thought that which resemble Nazi Germany rather than central or in touch with us country. So I think that nowadays European Endowment for Democracy is trying to do its best to be very practical, flexible, helping individual journalists, helping local media outlets, helping national media, and also sensitizing European policymakers towards assisting both Belarus and Ukraine. Surely situation is fundamentally different. In Ukraine there is pluralism. In Belarus you can't be free journalist. You would be immediately put to prison. So I think that nowadays, good news, if I'm trying to find one, is following. Heroism of Ukraine and capacity of Ukraine fight. And President Zelensky, it's incredible. And all what patriotism is all about, if Vladimir Putin thought that he will kill spirit of Ukrainians and attach them like Crimea in 2014, it didn't happen. Ukrainians are fighting incredible fight for their freedom and for freedom of the international order. Belarus, even if hundreds of people are in prison, journalists, non-journalists, activists, politicians, and so on, I think spirit is still alive, and we are trying also to support as we can as ED journalists and civic activists in general in Belarus as well. But most importantly, all West found in last 2 months capacity to unite, because we can't deal country by country. Sanction policy towards Russia is unprecedented. Surely there will be consequences in energy sector and all kinds of other things, but the West, both European Union and NATO countries, I think are working together now in this existential period, and I think that together with brave people, including journalists in Belarus and in Ukraine, and the two countries are trying to help each other as much as they can, we just simply cannot relax, and we need to do everything in order to stop this bloody war and to restore what we used to have, respect to sovereignty of country, to inviolability of borders, respect to statehood, and so on. Elementary things which we thought that this is given, but this is not. And whether you are professionals in the room or students who would be engaged in future, I think that We live in very complicated, unpredictable time, but keeping spirit and hope alive, where journalists are playing such a profound role, is of utmost importance. And I would like, on this World Press Freedom Day, thank very much organizers of yesterday gala, today event, and everybody who is trying to highlight the role of journalists in these tough times, because we are in the same boat wherever we are from, whether from Belarus, from Ukraine, from Poland, from Slovakia, from Belgium, or any country, because I think we are at crossroads situation of European and world history. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Pavol. So we need to stop the war, we need to restore independent sovereignty, and journalism is part of it. Now I would like to invite the audience to ask questions. If you have any immediate questions right now, please don't hesitate to raise your hands. Yes?
Hi, good morning. I have a couple of short questions. One is for Barys. You mentioned briefly through the translation that some people in Russia don't trust the government. I was wondering, I mean, sometimes the information we get is mixed, but at least sometimes we hear that since the start of the war, a proportion of the population in Russia is supporting Vladimir Putin. So I was wondering if you could share what the average Russian thinks about the war, how they understand what is currently happening. And the second question is for Mr. DEmes. Of course, we are speaking about Ukraine and Belarus today, but I was wondering if you could share a thought on the situation in Azerbaijan.
Thank you for your question. Your question about Russians or Belarusians?
In this case, because I think Jakub already said that thanks to the work that you do, many people in Belarus are getting more information about what is actually going on. But because Russia is, let's say, more controlled, sometimes we get the view that at least part of the population in Russia is supporting Vladimir Putin.
I think, Barys, if you could explain why people in Belarus trust independent media and what meaning of it, why it's so important for people to get this information. They're so politicized, that they try to get it. In Russia, there is a little bit different situation, and I know that you would focus rather on Belarus because that's your area of expertise. So perhaps focus on Belarus more, and maybe you could also draw some comparisons with Russia in that case.
Да, по российской ситуации я вообще не могу сказать, российская ситуация кардинально отличается от белорусской.
Yes, sorry about Russian situation. I cannot say because there is a big difference between Russia and Belarus situation. Really.
По российской ситуации мы можем, насчет российской ситуации мы можем делать какие-то мнения по немногочисленным социологическим опросам в России.
About the situation in Russia, we can have some opinions grounded on a few sociological researches done in Russia.
Насколько это вообще сейчас возможно в России, их проведение?
In the measure what is early now is possible to make such researches, sociological researches in Russia.
Есть разные мнения, но очевидно, что большинство россиян поддерживает Путина, и это результат отсутствия независимых медиа, независимых источников информации во многом.
There is different opinions, but we can say that a part of Russian people is actually supporting Vladimir Putin because of the lack of independent media and truthful information in Russia.
Большая часть русского общества.
Biggest part of Russian society, actually.
к сожалению, так сложилось, что вот у нас есть такой общий с Украиной сосед, который, ну, как так получается, я не знаю, почему из людей, ну, почему люди приходят к такой идеологии нападения на другие страны.
Unfortunately, it just happened that we with Karen have such neighbor, but you don't know how people get to such ideas that to
Нападать на другие страны, захватывать какие-то территории.
to get some neighbors territories with people is normal.
Для меня всегда это был вопрос, когда россияне часто приезжают в Беларусь и говорят, ну вы же тоже наш регион, зачем вам эта независимость, давайте будем считать просто, вы же часть России.
It was always a question for me when Russian people come to Belarus and says that, oh, you are actually our region, let's consider you as a part of Russia.
Я даже расскажу такой смешной случай. Мой коллега приехал в Россию, подключал сим-карту по паспорту, и в интернет-центре специалист смотрит белорусский паспорт, спрашивает, а какой ваш код российского региона, какой вы номер региона?
I can tell you a funny story, kind of funny story with what happened with my colleague in Russia. He came and was trying to connect SIM card on the mobile center, and was showed just his Belarus passport, but a person who was working in this center was looking at his Belarus passport and asked, I'm really sorry, what is your Russian Federation region code?
Ну, регионы России имеют номера.
Russian Federation regions had its numbers.
И вот человек на полном серьезе спрашивает, какой регион России, каким регионом является Беларусь?
And such question meant that actually this person was trying to understand what number of Russia region has Belarus.
Короткая ситуация в Беларуси.
Briefly about situation in Belarus.
У нас запрещены независимые социологические исследования.
In Belarus, it is restricted to do independent sociological researches.
За это предусмотрена ответственность.
People can have responsibility for that.
И в диктатуре не каждый человек готов, даже если такая возможность, не каждый человек готов поделиться своим мнением. Ты никогда не знаешь, с кем ты делишься на улице.
And not every people is ready to share his opinion on the street on the conditions of dictatorship, because people don't know with whom never know with whom they are actually sharing their opinion on the street.
Но наше ощущение по нашей аудитории, по нашим коллегам, по нашим друзьям, по нашим родным в Беларуси, что ситуация где-то 30% за Россию.
If we regard it on our feelings or conversations with audience, colleagues, friends and families in Belarus, so we can say that maybe 30% of people in Belarus are pro-Russia.
60 против войны, и для белорусов это важно.
60% are against the war, and it's important for Belarus people.
И 10% это люди, которые или не делятся своим мнением, или в такой сложной геополитической ситуации, как сейчас, они просто не интересуются политикой, им тяжело сделать свое мнение.
And also 10%, these are people who have a difficulty with understanding what actually is their opinion in such a complicated, such complication. Я сломал. Such complicated geopolitical situation.
Ну, вот по Беларуси мы, наверное, так видим нашу социологию.
This is how we can sociological things in Belarus.
Thank you, Barys. Also, I think it's important to mention that, the large absolute majority of Belarusians do not want to be part of Russia. So this has been the case for years, for decades. And I think in Russia there is, maybe because of propaganda, maybe because of some imperialistic moods, whatever, there is this sort of feeling or how to say, like will to see Belarus, as a not maybe as part of Russia, but as a neighbor, as a sphere of interest, as a country where Russians could freely go and where they feel as if they are, at home. So there is this, slight difference. Pavol, the question.
On Azerbaijan, just one thing on this Russia attitude and difference. I think that since we are celebrating journalists, and particularly those who fight in oppressive regimes, I think we need to mention Russian journalists as well. And yesterday, they live under most incredible conditions, because recently Russian parliament, after outbreak of war in Ukraine, they passed special law. If you call war and not special operation, you are getting they will close your media, and you will get 15 years prison. So I think that just speaking about what Putin is doing and all army, you can't report on that, you can't label it as war. This is special operation to expand Russian world and to liberate Ukrainians from their illusion that they are independent, which is Dadaistic political attitude, but this is the case. And yesterday we were supposed to have Mr. Muratov, who is Nobel Prize laureate for peace, Russian journalist, so he could address at gala dinner only via video, but they are risking life and imprisonment every day, and many Russian journalists had to flee and operate similar, like our Belarusian colleagues, from outside. As far as Azerbaijan is concerned, within European Endowment for Democracy, and I serve on board and executive committee, I do not work here in Brussels, but we are assessing projects, proposals throughout 9 years, and there are a few colleagues who work in Secretariat of EED in the room, and you can talk to them after we are over with panel. But I can tell you that out of former Soviet republics, Azerbaijan for a very long time was a very tricky country, because number of political prisoners in Azerbaijan were always very high, thus supporting civil society groups, activists, media in Azerbaijan was very difficult, and we needed to do it very discreet way, not to hurt people there. But nowadays surely Belarus surpassed several times numbers of political prisoners there. And for any donor agency, be it European Union or Canadian or American, I mean, assisting these countries where authoritarianism reached this very high level, it's very complicated, and we needed to adjust. On one hand to help, but on the other not to hurt, because if you are disclosed that you received money, because Russia, Belarus, and several other countries are adopting legislation that receiving foreign aid, including European Union aid, is criminal act. So we need to be very sensitive and very practical how to assist journalists, and this is not for showcasing. As somebody from Central Europe, and we joined European Union, our countries, 18 years ago. We just, May 1st was 18th anniversary of Big Bang EU enlargement. If we were assisted, you could showcase it, and you proudly declared we got support from European Union or American organizations, public and private. But here, country like Azerbaijan you're asking about, or Belarus and Russia and other countries, I think that it's very risky for people, or impossible for people to tell that they were assisted. But Azerbaijan definitely is one of the countries where we pay attention. And lastly, EED is not operating just from offices in Brussels. All what we do is done through local people who are helping us to understand modus operandi. They are trying to be on ground and assess, help us to understand how we could assist those who are trying within very restrictive environments still keep hope alive, keep people informed, and trying to keep power holders accountable vis-à-vis public. So definitely Azerbaijan has also quite some brave people also from media area which are doing excellent job.
I think it's really a challenge to deliver help on the ground. It's the case for Belarus for the past 2 years. It's also now the case for Ukraine. Jakub, you mentioned the logistics and all the challenges. Look, I wanted to ask you because, well, in Belarus, I think the landscape, the media landscape is kind of we have this independent media, we have pro-regime media, state-controlled, we have obviously Russian propaganda. In Belarus, in Ukraine, it was, I think, more complicated in a way. There were privately owned media, there were public media. How did the media landscape change since the start of the war, and who was better prepared, if I can ask that?
That's a good question. Well, the landscape didn't change in the sense that not so many people have sold or bought media in the last 60 days, but yes, it starts by being complicated by the fact that in Ukraine you have quite a lot of media that are owned by oligarchs historically. They were quite big. There was a small portion of what I would say is kind of let's say, and on TV, it's all oligarchs. I mean, the public broadcaster exists, but this is a tiny portion of the audience. And then you had, some corporate media, pretty narrow space there. And then you had an alternative media scene, an independent media scene. Some of them existed for a long time, Ukraińska Prawda. Some of them were launched 3 months ago, Kyiv Independent 4 months ago now. This was, so you had some vibrancy. I think, look, none of the media were particularly well prepared for what came. I think the investigative media actually were, to some extent a little bit ahead, mostly thanks to international partnerships. I think the oligarchic media, they don't seem to be like, the oligarchs did not pour that much money into it, sort of helping them out. And let's say that the media that were owned by sort of wealthy individuals, to sort of look more broadly, they didn't have a particular leg forward that, the independent media did not have. And I think going forward, right now, because the advertising market is gone, donors will come, donors will go, but the media that have the trust of the audience and of readership, they are in the strongest position to move forward. And I think those were the ones that will, where the hope really lies.
It's very interesting to see how how it's going to develop and continue, and how this media would be able or not be sustainable. I think we have time for questions, for one at least. Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentations and for everything you're doing. I'm Annie Tubbs. I'm a student at the VUB, and lots of food for thought in what you've shared with us. But one question, you talked about the media not necessarily being prepared, and what, with 2020 hindsight, you might have started doing 5 years ago. Based on those insights, is there anything you'd want to say to media elsewhere in the world that, in terms of urgent message and learnings, that they should be drawing on straight away when it comes to shoring up their scope to sort of defend press freedom and democracy? Are there any messages they should be acting on immediately? And then another question is, if we stay optimistic as we want to do, and we think about a future where the outcome is one that we hope for, what does that mean for rebuilding press media and your relationship with very complicated populations across many places, with maybe also a big question mark on Russia?
I'm happy. Yeah, happy to start with that. Look, I'll be super practical because that's sort of the approach that we try to always have. Like, first, have bug out packs, right? Like, have some supplies of like various security gear and things like that. Yes, they can gather dust for a long time, and that's okay, right? Have resources in advance. Like, don't operate where you're always running on the edge of the line, which is what happens in a lot of emerging markets especially. But you need to have some overflow capacity in terms of spare money, spare resources, spare personnel. Don't always operate at like just breaking point, which is what media have a tendency to do. And the third thing is invest in developing and respect and retain good project managers. Because look, I'm a former journalist, and I have nothing but love for journalists. Journalists are usually terrible project managers. So when a crisis comes, you want somebody inside the organization who is actually able to organize and to react in a competent way, right? If you have chased that person out, or you have never grown that group of people, you will be in a problem.
I think Pavel wanted to add, and then Barys, okay?
One thing what we need to raise is that we are not speaking only about sort of big organized media nowadays because of technology. You can be a huge influencer via your own YouTube channel and so on in Belarus through Telegram and all kinds of other technological advancements. So media landscape is undergoing incredible change. And I think that we need to be as practical as possible, trying and to help to develop channels of communication with the audiences, but also try to see that autocrats are misusing these new technologies to manipulate large audiences. And in all EU countries nowadays, these hybrid operations and manipulations, disinformation, and how to deal with that is becoming big issue. Almost every ministry nowadays, this is not just one ministry, needs to think how to prevent youth to be manipulated, how to look at radicalization of politics in our societies, including Western European societies, how to prevent them. So I think that what used to be print media, electronic media, no more. Every newspaper has sort of video sections and so on. Every television wants to have also print, and plus these individuals who are trying to be influential, I think, are changing media landscape. So I think that nowadays, I think that those of you students would like to be journalists, I think there is enormous space to look at and think, what would you like to do? But key is not so much technology, but attitude and skills and desire to do things. And I think that Ukrainian, Belarusian, Russian, and other journalists are showing what does it take to be brave and keep sort of going on to disclose what's going on, bring stories and so on. So I think that also this issue of solidarity and networking among journalists has incredible role, and also just bringing journalists also to this capital of Europe and expose them to decision making, to understand peculiarities of situation within which they work, and develop links with Western journalists and local journalists. I think these are completely new avenues and territories which are making journalism such a fascinating profession, which is attracting more and more young people. And I think that on this very day one would expect that journalism will become even in more demand nowadays, because this world in flux and uncertainty, and while you are journalists you need to just keep sanity and purpose, focus besides practical things, because so many uncertainties jumped our way.
Yeah, some of you who want to become journalists remember that you also need project managers, as Jakub mentioned. But it's lessons learned, please.
Да, я как раз хотел об этом тоже сказать.
Yes, I wanted also to tell about that.
Несмотря на то, что значит, менеджмент проектов в сфере медиа очень сложный, это очень интересная работа.
In spite of management, media project management is very complicated. This is a very interesting work.
Нас мотивирует, конечно же, не только деньги, и, наверное, не деньги вообще.
We are motivated not only for money and maybe not money at all.
Журналистика – это общественное добро.
Journalism, this is a civil good.
Это возможность менять мир к лучшему.
This is an opportunity to change world to the better.
Причем довольно просто, показывая просто ситуации, которые кто-то пытается спрятать общественности, обществу.
But the way is quite easy, just showing the situations which the other people are trying to hide.
Я однозначно остаюсь оптимистом всегда, поэтому я, в общем-то, тут и сижу.
I'm always staying optimist, so this is why I'm sitting here, actually.
Когда в прошлом году зимой ко мне пришли домой с обыском,
on the last winter, they, like, police forces came to my apartment with some persecution.
У нас забрали дома абсолютно всю технику, даже там флешки, телефоны детей какие-то старые, полностью всю технику забрали из дома.
They took all the technical stuff from our house, including computers, kids' flash cards, telephones, phones, and so on.
И я был очень оптимистично настроен, потому что меня не посадили.
I was very I had a very optimistic mind because I wasn't actually put on the prison.
Когда Дмитрий Муратов зимой был объявлен Нобелевским лауреатом,
when in the winter Dmitry Muratov was announced as a new Nobel Prize laureate,
в своем самом таком популярном интервью на нашем пространстве, это было интервью телеканала Евроньюз.
Then we gave the most popular interview in our media field. It was an interview to media Euronews.
У него спросили, верит ли он в победу, в то, что мы увидим плоды своей работы.
He had a question if he really believed to the victory and that we will see the fruits of our work.
Он сказал, что мы не проиграем войну.
He said that we will not lose this war.
Это не о войне в Украине, а о войне за правду.
This is not about the war about Ukraine. This is about the war for the truth.
Но как бы результаты нашей работы увидят наши потомки.
But only our children and people who will be after us will see the results of our work.
Я тут больше оптимист.
I'm more optimistic here.
Потому что мы живем в абсолютно новом мире.
Because we're living in a completely new world.
Я не представляю, что в этом мире телеграммов, всех этих интернет-технологий, скайлинков и всего, диктатуры могут реально долго продержаться в Европе.
I cannot imagine that dictatorship can have really long life in this new world with all these new technologies as telegrams and Starlinks and other.
Когда сейчас въезжаешь или выезжаешь из Беларуси, ты должен декларировать даже флеш-карту или даже дискету, если ты ее ввозишь или вывозишь, ты должен заполнять декларацию.
When you came to Belarus or came out, you have to declare everything, including your phones and flash card from your mobile phone, and even hard diskette, like small old diskette from computer.
From the 90s, something from the 90s,
Yeah.
which we don't remember.
И это особенно смешно, понимая, что сейчас невозможно скрыть правду.
And this is really ridiculous because it's clearly now is not possible to hide the truth.
Власти могут сколько угодно требовать декларировать дискеты,
The authorities can keep asking to declare these small discs from 19s,
но даже моя 5-летняя дочь
but even my 5-year-old daughter
может найти в интернете то, что она ищет.
can find everything she needs on the internet.
Поэтому я надеюсь на позитив. Я остаюсь оптимистом.
So I still be optimist and I hope to the positive future.
Look, so we discussed the real war in Ukraine, we discussed the information war in, well, both countries, also in Russia, but I think the word optimism, like something positive, was mentioned here more than at any other panel, I would say. And I also believe that there is a lot of hope. It's really emotional Olympics to tell your country's crisis, to explain that, tell to the world what's happening. But nothing can be more important. And Belarusian journalists report despite state terror, despite repressions. Ukrainian journalists report despite bombs, despite shelling. They risk their lives to tell their stories and the stories of their communities, and they perfectly understand why it's so important to have this profession, to be a journalist, and also a project manager, partly. And I'm grateful to the international community for solidarity, for unity, for support. That's something that Pavol mentioned, and thank you to EED to be a really important contributor to help in helping media field and helping the media industry. So we've run out of time, and I would like to ask you to give a round of applause to our great speakers. Thank you very much.